Keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on the sunny side of life. It will help us every day, it will brighten all the way. If you keep on the sunny side of life. This time where I'm recording this seems like the light is fading at times, and you feel like darkness is coming at you. That you face that darkness as you go along, you deal with it, and as we talk about this idea of fighting for faith, I'm talking about this on tonight and then on this weekend, where we talk about when things don't turn out like you thought. Fighting for faith when things don't turn out like you thought, that your expectations were different. There's a lot of temptations that go and that batter you and you struggle with when that happens in your life. You know, sometimes we are so sure how things are going to work out. We want to be optimistic. We want to be positive. We want to, if any way we can, to be the person that, you know, if you can't say anything positive, don't say anything at all. Of course, there'd be an awful lot of the Bible that you wouldn't be able to talk about if all those prophets, and like we talk about on the weekend when we talk about Jeremiah. But sometimes we're just so sure. It just seems like it's going to happen. We pray about it. We're sure God must have the same idea of how things should go as I do, maybe you do, or maybe corporately, as we think it should, as a group. God's got the same idea as us. Everyone we know agrees. Everyone we know thinks this is how it ought to go. And then it seems like there are many, many times in life where things end up going the exact opposite of what we were not just hoping for, but what we were counting on. Now, if this has never happened to you, I'm glad for you. And my guess is that if you live for a while, it will. And this will challenge your faith. And for many of you right now in these times, it is challenging your faith. Your faith is really being pushed. Now, what happens sometimes in moments like this is you can start living in denial of the obvious facts going on around you. Sometimes you get that mixed up. You think that is what your faith is, that you just need to live in denial. But faith is never really to escape reality. Faith is to give you the grace and the wisdom to know how to deal with reality. Faith is not being a person who tries to live obliviously. Faith is a person who lives, who can see difficulty and evil and hide themselves sometimes. People get angry too when this happens. Most people do. What they can tend to do is double down into their own thinking that I'm so sure this should have happened. And people can throw away the joys of their life, the happiness of their life by responding in this way. And we are in days where this tendency is happening. People doubling down when things aren't working out like they hoped. People getting angry. But we're in days where this is happening. And it's happening to many, many followers of Jesus Christ and people like you and me. And it's not pretty. It really isn't pretty. This is not a new problem for people that are faith walkers. Remember, we walk by faith, not by sight. In Matthew chapter 11:1, there's a little narrative, and it says this: and Jesus had finished giving instructions to the 12 disciples. He departed from there to teach and to preach in the cities. Now, when John, while in prison, heard of the works of Christ, he sent word by his disciples, John the Baptist. He said to him, "Are you the expected one, or shall we look for someone else?" And Jesus answered and said, "Go and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up. The poor have the gospel preached to them." And then Jesus says something amazing. "And blessed is he who does not take offense at me." You see, John the Baptist was an incredible figure, dynamic, godly, holy. He was unlike anybody else. And he started out strong, like many, many people do in the Bible, and of course, like many people that you and I have known. John's following was huge. People were coming out from all over the place, even the leaders from Jerusalem, to come down into the wilderness to see him. And his message was clear. And the Messiah himself had appeared to him. The chosen one had appeared in a miraculous way during a baptism. A dove had descended from heaven and rested on him. And the voice of the Father said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." It was an incredible moment. For John, it seemed like this new kingdom of repented, godly people, all that he had hoped for, was just around the corner. And then things went sideways. Then things went the opposite of what he expected. What had happened to John was he had upset the ego of a local politician. And what happened very quickly is once that took place, he ended up rotting in a dungeon. Not a pretty experience. He would be trotted out from time to time and as a novelty. But it wasn't anything that he had imagined was going to happen. You see, he was a person like you and me. He had his struggles and he had his expectations and he had a limited amount of knowledge, just like you and me. He didn't know everything. He didn't have a clear picture of history and exactly how things were going to work out. But he had a pretty good inkling and a hope. And the sad part is that while he was in the dungeon, perhaps he knew, perhaps he didn't, but soon enough, he would end up dead with his head as a centerpiece in a meeting of the local ruling class, just because of the whim of a jealous and angry relative of that politician. But in the middle of that, before he was executed, his head was cut off, put on a silver platter. In the middle of John's disappointment and darkness, dark clouds will gather around me. Before that turn of events had played out in the taking of his life, he had some honest doubts. I mean, it would make sense that he would. And this is okay to have honest doubts. You know, doubts are to faith what pain is to life. If you have faith, you're going to sometimes have doubts about how things are going. Just like if you are alive, you're going to have some pain. The doctor wants to see if you're alive, he'll poke you. Sometimes we have doubts. You know, those are the times in your life where it's not a bad thing. It's good to doubt yourself sometimes. No, we don't want to doubt God, but it's good to doubt yourself sometimes and have enough self-reflection that you could ask yourself, maybe I got this wrong. Maybe I don't really have the full picture. Maybe the problem is not with God, but with my confidence. Maybe the problem is in my overconfidence that I have his plan all figured out. Like the old Hebrew proverb says, if you want to give God a good laugh, tell him your plans. It's funny, I know this has been true of me, how self-righteous, how sure we can be about us having it figured out. Just ask, in the terms of church history, especially American church history, just ask William Miller, who predicted the end of the world in the early 1800s. He had it down to the day. Well, a couple days. He had to keep moving it. When he finally died and they put his tombstone out, he put the epitaph on that tombstone, "No man knows the day or the hour." But it took a lot for him to come to that. You see, John asked that question because of the darkness, those dark clouds he found around him, those difficult times that had come upon his life. He said in verse 3, he said, "Are you the expected one, or shall we look for someone else?" In other words, this isn't working out exactly like I expected in the way I expected. He was in a sense saying, "Are you sure, Lord, that this is how it's got to go?" Now Jesus tries to encourage him. He says in verse 4 of Matthew 11, he says, "Go and report to John what you hear and see." In other words, let him know that God is still working. Even in the middle of all this, God is still doing a big thing. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is he who does not take offense at me. Blessed are those, as the King James says, who be not offended in me. As the old preachers used to say, this is the beatitude of the unoffended. That's what they call it, the beatitude of the unoffended. Jesus was saying, look, happy is the person who doesn't get offended when things don't go as you planned and as you hoped. But you have to hold these things loosely in your hands. Happy is a person who doesn't get offended when God doesn't follow your plan. You see, sometimes we think we submit our plan to God and say, "Give me your rubber stamp of approval." And that's when we begin to learn that God is, in fact, really God, not us. And that takes faith. You have to come back to this over and over and over again in the walk of faith, a step at a time. The Lord does, as the old saying says, move in mysterious ways. And the sooner you accept that, the mystery, the happier you will be, and probably the happier a lot of the people that have to live with you will be. You don't have to have all the answers, and you don't have to have all the facts, because you are not in charge. And besides that, you would know what to do if you did. So if you don't end up marooned on the bitter rocks of offense, you'll be happy. But if you allow yourself to be marooned on the bitter rocks of offense, if you don't release this to him, if you don't embrace the mystery of God's purposes, you'll be angry. You'll end up being deluded in your miserable insistence that you are still right, even though it's clear you aren't. If you feel doubt, a temptation to live in denial or to be offended, remember this. On the day that John said the least thing about Jesus, that same day, Jesus said the greatest thing about him. He did. He never said anything bad about John because he was going through this. Jesus understands that in the fight for faith, doubt is an occupational hazard. Only people with faith will sometimes have doubts. And that's why Jesus went on to say, there was no one that ever was raised up greater than John. You can read that in Matthew 11 for yourself. That day where John had his weakest moment, Jesus said the greatest thing about him. There's nobody ever has been greater than John. So I just want to remind you of what Jesus' promise was. Happy, blessed is he who does not take offense in me, especially when things are not going exactly like he planned. Don't be offended with God for being God. Don't live in denial on the island of double down. You keep doubling down that, you must have been right. Don't be angry at God or the world or the pastor or somebody else who maybe didn't see it exactly like you, or maybe they weren't as sure of you as you were of you. Just have faith and see what God has next. Remember, I'm just a poor wayfaring stranger. That's all we are. We're traveling through this world of woe. But there's a lot of joy in the middle of it as we trust him. God bless you.